Hi, I'm Gina-R-Farrar, reinvention coach, creator and host of Feminine Roadmap podcast, and leader of this amazing global community of women. If you are approaching midlife or are already in the thick of it, welcome home. Please grab a cup of something wonderful and join me for some real talk, practical strategies, and a big dose of sisterhood. I am so glad you're here. Hello, Feminine Roadmappers. It is Gina here, and I am back today with a conversation about connection. Connection is the biggest indicator of happiness, and my guest today wants women to recognize everyone that you meet is either your teacher or your student, and she really wants women to understand how important it is to let the people around you know how you feel about them and build those intimate connections, even the more casual connections, because it makes our life so rich and full. And to have this conversation with me today is Shari Leid. She's a life coach. She's the author of 50/50 Friendship Flow, and she is also a woman who has been diagnosed with breast cancer. So to have this conversation, Shari, thank you so much for being on my show today.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to begin October with you.
I know, we were talking about that, right? Like October. How did that even happen? All right. Since my audience may or may not know who you are, why don't you give us a little bit of who you are and what led you to this specific message?
Absolutely. Well, I live in the Seattle area, and I'm 50 years old, turned 50 last December. And I was a trial attorney for quite a few years, but then stayed home with my kids for a while. As I got older, when I was around 47, I started to think, what is my life purpose? What do I want to do? What am I passionate about? And during that same time is when I received the diagnosis of breast cancer that you mentioned. And that really propelled me forward. That's when I got serious about my journaling and really got intentional about the way I decide to live life. And during that same time, I happened to attend a good friend's funeral. And at this funeral, I noticed many people coming up, and actually there was an opportunity for people to come up and say what this woman meant to them. And even though I knew her so well, I didn't know all the people who attended the funeral. And I was absolutely touched by the stories that they shared and the way that she impacted their lives. And I thought, why didn't we tell her this when she was alive? Why didn't we sit down and share these things with her? I had been together with her on so many occasions, but I never sat down one-on-one with her to tell her what she means to me or what lessons she has taught me. And so with this premise that everyone we meet is both our teacher and our student, actually, I decided between my 49th and 50th birthday to sit down and meet with 50 women in my life, some new acquaintances, some lifelong friends, but all for the sole purpose of telling them what lesson I've learned, what they meant to me, and hearing their stories.
That's an incredible journey to go on. Mm-hmm. Now, as you were going on that journey, what was your objective? Do you have a framework that you used so that it was kind of similar, or how did you do that?
Initially, I'm on my second journey of this right now, and right now I have a little bit more of a framework, but initially when I first started, it was my own personal journey, and I just wanted to sit down one-on-one with people. At first it was a little uncomfortable to do because we're not used to doing that, at least not for the purpose of telling another person, this is what I've noticed about you. For example, there's one woman I met with, and when I first met her, and I didn't know her very long when I set up this actual date to talk to her, but the first time I had met her, she greeted me so warmly that in my mind, I thought, wow, that is the way I want to greet people. And so just that instant meeting with her, that first time, she taught me how to greet people. And honestly, it's changed my interaction with new people that I come across. And so I met with her, And I sat down with her just to share with her how she changed my life simply from the way she greeted me.
Mm. That's such a wonderful legacy. And it seems like such a small thing, doesn't it? It really brings
Yes,
to light that kind of impact of something as simple as kindness or warmth.
absolutely. And then what I realized while I was going through this process was that the women I spoke to, a lot of times it became emotional for them. And I realized, wow, this is also something that we're missing. We, and maybe it's more so with women than men, I don't know, but we, at least women at our age, we aren't seen, or at least we're not told that we're seen. And to have somebody tell us that, even if it's as simple as saying, boy, I love the way you greet people, even if it's as simple as that, to actually being seen, brought on so many emotions from the women I spoke to. It wasn't uncommon that they would break down with gratitude. And so, that prompted me to think, okay, this is something that really needs to happen and we need to practice it.
I remember a time in my life where if I got a compliment, it would like overwhelm me and I would cry every time. And I used to get so frustrated with myself. This was like when I was younger. So if somebody started saying nice things about me, I would just really get emotional about it. And so as you're talking about this, Shari, all I can think of is learning to take a compliment. Is
Yes.
something that we don't think about, but it is hard for people to hear you talk about them. Most people struggle to be in the spotlight like that. It's uncomfortable.
Right.
So, did you find that you had varied responses? Because I know when I've been very open with people, sometimes they withdraw.
Yes, it was interesting because when I met with these women, I met with a variety of women, women from all ages, all ethnic backgrounds, different political views, different economic positions, different educational levels. And so, the variety of women, you bring your stuff, right? Whenever you have a conversation and how you absorb things. And I think the variety made it even more interesting to see, especially I think the generational and also maybe even ethnic differences between the women and cultures that made hearing the compliment, as you described, different the way they took things in. So that was interesting. But there was a common thread, even though the responses were different. The common thread was that, wow, this is making a difference in my life. To have somebody sit down with me to say that they see me and recognize something in me. And I often received texts, emails, and phone calls after these meetings where the women would say, you know what? I was driving this week and I thought about what you said. And, wow, that made a difference. Or, I never thought about myself that way, but you're right. That's something that I've had in me for a while. And, what do you think of this? I want to do this with it. So that was the universal truth, despite the responses being different and people's comfort level being a little different from each other with receiving compliments. The universal response was, wow, this makes a difference.
Mm. Did you learn some strategies to help ease them into it, or was there a way that you approached it? Because it really is a human dynamic when you go to an intimate place like that you're going to get some very different responses depending on, like you said, everyone brings their stuff with them. And your heart could be completely pure. Your intention could be right there to just give someone a compliment. But depending on their life and where they've come from, it can hit maybe differently than we intend. And it's not to discourage someone from doing it, but it's to recognize that your gift, I would think, and Shari, you can expound on this. You're giving someone a gift. What they do with it is really their responsibility. It's just you're being obedient to that feeling of like, I need to give this gift to this
Yes.
person, right?
Correct, and what helped was because I did this kind of as a challenge, meeting with 50 women, I told them ahead of time, this is my challenge. This is something that's important to me that I want to do. And I did this over a course of a year. When I decided to meet one-on-one with 50 women. I'm doing this again now, except this time I'm doing it with Zoom instead of in person. But I had this framework. So they knew the framework going in, that this was a challenge for me. And I told them the purpose being that everyone we meet is our teacher and our student. And I want to share with you what you've taught me. And so with that, one, it spurred curiosity. One woman I met with, she's this beautiful, beautiful human being, and she's able to wear all these bright colors and cheery colors. And so she actually thought, what possibly could I, want to meet with her for? And she thought, well, maybe I was going to tell her that she's taught me how to wear bright colors or something like that. But my purpose of meeting with her was just to tell her that she's one of the most powerful women that I know, which surprised her. And I explained why. And it was because of her authenticity. And when she walks into a room, even though she's quiet, people listen to her because she's so authentic in the way she approaches life, and that surprised her. And she realized that I saw what was inside of her, and that changed something for her. So having this framework of telling women that I was sitting down with them in this challenge, and this challenge is kind of outlined in the book, and other women have taken it, which gives them a framework too. So they could say, hey, I'm taking this challenge. Can we sit down? So it makes it a little less awkward and a little less, you feel a little bit less vulnerable, even though that vulnerability piece is certainly there.
Mm. And how did this experience change you, Shari? Mm-hmm. What was the payback or the result for you?
Yeah. Well, one, it deepened my connection with every woman I sat down with. It deepened my relationships with them. They saw that I truly appreciate them being in my life. But for me, it made me realize that, yes, I did truly appreciate everyone who's come into my life. By doing this practice, it's made it automatic now that when I meet someone, I automatically now look for that teaching piece. Mm. Why is this person in my life right now? I automatically now look for the common story, which I find has been really important this year when there's so much divide. I've learned to recognize from this practice that even when we disagree with each other, we have some common story just based on our human experiences, and being able to focus on that common story and being able to see that common story, it honestly, it's changed my life. For me, it's taken away that automatic anger that I could get, when somebody disagrees with me or we're on different sides. It's provided me with a level of grace to deal with people. It's allowed me to show up with others the way I want to show up, by looking for that common story, looking for that moment, that teaching piece that I believe everyone brings to that I cross paths with.
I love how you talk about learning and finding the common story. Mm. I really do think that this particular season, we're recording in 2020. We're still around the world in varying degrees of quarantine. And that human connection has been so altered by this situation. And yes, Zoom has become the new chat room of the world, right? Everybody's using Zoom. People are even using it like as a descriptive term. I'm so zoomed out,
Yes.
It's actually becoming like a thing we say, and everybody knows exactly what you're talking about. And so it's so powerful to think about how we could use a resource like your 50-50 friendship flow to encourage us to make the extra effort in a season of life where it can be a little bit more difficult. Now, for some people, we're coming out of it and we're able to actually physically see people.
Mm-hmm.
But still, we've had some time to think about life as it was, life as it is, how we want life to be. So this seems like a really nice way to almost re-enter relationships and, like you said, don't wait till the funeral. And I've thought the exact same thing, Shari. I've been at funerals and thought, did anybody say this to this person? Like, did I say anything to this person? And so I really feel like it's such a timely message because of this unusual situation we find ourselves in. And so since you went from face-to-face last year to, using Zoom or FaceTime or whatever it is you used, how was that different for you going from face-to-face physically to using a digital version of connection?
Well, it's interesting because I started this second round of challenges just a month ago. I got a little bit more used to Zoom than I had been, previously. So the first time face-to-face, I loved the face-to-face, but it was time consuming. To do that because I met, and there was a cost factor involved too, because I chose to meet at, coffee shops or restaurants, which was lovely. But really, because I want to encourage others to do this, it really time-wise and cost-wise, it's not the most efficient way to connect if you want to connect with a large number of people. But the idea, though, is you can connect with, decide ahead of time to connect with 5 people or 10 people. It doesn't have to be 50, but just some number over a course of a year. Now, doing this by Zoom, I found one, it's more accessible, right, to meet with people. Now, actually, there are women that I've met with that don't live in my area. They live across the country, or even I've met with a woman who's in Canada. So that's opened up more people that I can contact and talk with. Also, I found that there is something about the Zoom maybe that makes it a little more safe for the recipient. If they're not used to receiving a compliment, it feels a little bit more comfortable to do so in the comfort of their home. But this time around too, I'm a little more structured, and I decided to ask the question, and I got this from a Robin Roberts masterclass. She explained that her mom taught her to make her messes her messages. So this second time around, I'm asking women on these one-on-one meetings, what's the mess that became your message? So the first time around, I decided to focus on what they taught me. And this time around, I'm listening to their stories of what their mess is that became their messages. And I'm asking them beforehand. I'm saying, this is what I'm looking for. So there's no pressure, to have these meetings with me. And I explain that mess can be very broadly construed. It could be something catastrophic, or it could be stuck in a traffic jam and feeling frustrated, and all of a sudden, gains a message that, maybe this is extra time for me and enjoy this time that I have for myself, or whatever it is. But the difference this time around is not only the structure, but also the Zoom meetings allows a little bit of safety for the women I talk to, I think, a little bit of comfort in their own home and to receive a message in their own home, and accessibility. It doesn't cost anything, and it takes up to an hour. I allow up to an hour, and I tell them that ahead of time, and we're able to connect no matter where we are.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting, isn't it? I didn't think about that, but it's kind of like a home court advantage.
Mm-hmm.
You can surround yourself with the things that make you feel safe. And back to what I was thinking about before and talking about is someone's emotional state. The way that people engage with vulnerability is so varied.
Mm-hmm.
And what to you and I might not feel terribly vulnerable, I'm sure is received by some people as this really intimate, vulnerable thing. And have you had any experiences where maybe the response was, I don't want to say negative, but not quite what you expected?
Honestly, I have no expectation, I guess, with the response necessarily. I'm, going into these conversations with a focus of listening. And it's interesting because the first time around, it wasn't meant to become a book. It kind of organically grew that way because I was posting these little pieces on Facebook with pictures of myself and the friends I met with. And I started to have women contact me and ask me, how did I get started on this? They think it's really interesting. They would like to do this too. So it kind of grew into a book. So that being said, the women I met with, at least for the first 3/4 of the 50 women, had no idea that this was going to become a book. And we didn't meet with that intention. So when it did become a book and I reached out and told them, hey, this is what's going to happen. There's no pressure to be in the book. I'm going to use first names. I have pictures in the books, but I also said there's no pressure to have your picture in the book. Or you could just say, no, this is the purpose of our meeting was for our conversation, not for this to become a book. And all 50 women graciously said, yes, this is important. Put me in the book. Not all 50 women want their photos in the book, which is completely fine. But they thought that the process was important. But yeah, you asked about vulnerability, and that's the part that surprised me is their willingness to let these meetings be shared.
I've done kind of a little similar thing, if you will. I've been sending little watercolor postcards. I just paint something which puts me in a vulnerable place, right?
Yes.
And then I send it, and because it's a postcard, I can just be very brief about what I appreciate about that friend.
Oh, I love that.
It's interesting because they're people I know. I did send a letter to someone, and I never heard anything, which I had interviewed another gal about a thank you project. And her thing was she had a framework, and you write a letter and you let people know. And the same conversation came up about expectation. And it's interesting because I think some people choose to respond and let you know they got it, and some people don't. So you just really have on that expectation piece. It's really something to just put that gift out there and let whatever be and be at peace with that. Is that something that you felt? Because it is a little bit different because I'm doing it a little bit more safely, if you will. I'm painting something that I think they might appreciate and letting them know.
Yes, no, I appreciate that. It is, it's interesting because with the meetings, I honestly did not have an expectation because like you mentioned, it is hard to take a compliment. I know if I was sitting in their shoes, and actually some women, after I did this, they started their own process of this challenge. And I was the recipient of a couple of those dates for them. And I found it very difficult to sit in that place where I was receiving a compliment or being told what they've learned from me. And it was hard for me to be quiet and not downplay anything that they said or automatically throw a compliment back at them. So I recognize that. So as far as the meetings go, that expectation piece wasn't there for me. Like I didn't expect them to give back, and I almost wanted them to just absorb and not feel like they needed to give back. But I will tell you, you mentioned art, and art is very, very personal. And writing this book, it's so easy to get caught up in, wanting something back, especially with social media and having to kind of put yourself out there. It's so easy to get caught up in the likes and all of that. And so every day when I journal, I write down to remind me of my purpose as far as my expectations go, is that really I want to touch one woman. And so I actually, in my office, I have a picture of one woman. It's not a woman I know, but it's a woman around our age. And I just, the picture is to remind me that my purpose really here is to touch one woman. If I can affect the life of one woman where she reaches out and decides to talk to 5 friends over a course of a year to tell each of these people, or even 5 acquaintances, what she's learned from them, and recognizes that, then that's my job's done. I mean, that's what I want to do, because I really feel it's like the butterfly effect, right? You touch one person, and maybe the person that she said, hey, this is what you taught me, or I appreciate you, this is why you're in my life, or I want to hear your story. Maybe that person recognizes the power in being listened to and being seen, and that person goes off and talks to another person, whether it's their friend, their daughter, their mother, their sister. So for expectations, I try to keep my purpose in check to make sure that my expectations don't get away from me and don't get misguided.
I think not really having expectations as much as humanly possible, I think removing that also helps us to enjoy the process. Wouldn't you agree?
Absolutely. As I tell my daughter a lot, she's 20 years old, and I tell her when she, has conflicts, or, there's a lot of social stuff going on at that age, that you can't control another person. Mm-hmm. And so, that's what I think of when I think about expectations. It's basically getting into somebody else's journey. If you have expectations as to how you wish they respond, and once you get into somebody else's journey, you're off your own. So with that in mind, just focusing on as much as we can, like you say, our purpose, without diving in and getting into the box of others, what you expect from other people, because that's their journey. That's not something we control.
Mm-hmm. And I think you don't always know how you're crossing someone's path could alter the trajectory, right? Something you
Absolutely.
say, something you do. So there is this kind of on a quantum physics level, right? There's this impact we may or may not ever know about, meaning that it impacts them internally.
Yes.
That's what I mean by like quantum physics. It's something you can't see, but there is a shift, and it may lead them in a direction. It may impact, like you said, that butterfly effect. And that's such a powerful thing. And even if it didn't, let's bring that all the way back to even if it didn't. Mm-hmm. What is the greatest blessing that you've received from doing this face-to-face experience?
The greatest blessing I've received is happiness. I mean, it's gratitude. You can't do this process of, listing people in your life and thinking about what they've meant to you, or what lesson they've taught you, without also receiving the gift of realizing how blessed your life is. Even with the hardships, you see the people who were there, what they taught you during those times. And so what this has brought me is really, and this is great. Like I said, I just turned 50 last December, and to receive this now, this gratitude, I'm so thankful for the process. And like I mentioned earlier, I believe that everyone's ultimate goal in life is happiness. It's not, titles. It's not wealth or a collection of possessions. It really is happiness. And I think that's universally true worldwide. So to receive this through these one-on-one meetings and building these relationships has been my greatest gift.
That's so fantastic. Tell me a little bit about the title of your book, The 50-50 Friendship Flow. How did you come up with that? Is there a special meaning to that 50-50?
Yeah, so initially it was just me turning 50, meeting 50 women. That's how it initially started. But then as I went along, I realized, this is a give and take. And somebody had mentioned that, because I had titled my Facebook album 50-50. And they assumed that meant, this is a give and take. This is where we sit down one-on-one and we go, we talk to each other, we listen to each other. And so that's where that title came from the 50-50 friendship flow, and it's lessons from my girlfriends and for my girlfriends.
Mm. And that idea of community is so important to all humans. But I think as women, there's something magical about having your people, whether it's one person or five people. But that community piece is so important for our mental and emotional health. Have you found that that's a side benefit of what you're doing?
Absolutely. Like I said, living in happiness and gratitude. You look at, I love, if you're familiar with the blue zones, the study that they did of areas around the world where people live the longest. And I apologize that the author's names escape me, but it's called the blue zones. And they looked at what are the commonalities between these areas around the world. And it's not diet, although there are some similarities, not a lot of red meat and things like that. But one of the number one predictors was the relationships, the community connections that each of these communities had, whether, it be with their family, with friends, or with the community as a whole. It was these strong connections that were common amongst these communities around the world where people live the longest. So there's been shown that there's a correlation between relationships and longevity of life, and also a correlation between happiness and relationships.
The correlation between relationships and longevity. Mm-hmm. I have heard that is one of the deficiencies for a lot of men, is if their spouse passes, they don't live as long because they don't have the social support system to help them, continue to have a reason to live. There's something about having people around you that you love and that love you, right?
Yes, absolutely. If you have these relationships and you make these connections, you naturally have more positive experiences throughout your days because you're connecting with people who you have these positive relationships with. So naturally, if you have more positive experiences throughout your day, throughout your week, throughout your month, that contributes to longevity and youth.
Now, let's bring this to the midlife conversation. How has this been impactful in this particular season? How do you see this concept being impactful for someone in midlife specifically?
Yeah. So for midlife, as far as women go, from my own experience, it's a time of a lot of things going on, right? A lot of times your kids are leaving, your parents are getting older. Sometimes you're ready for a career change or going back to work or retirement. I mean, there are so many life changes. And a lot of times you feel isolated. And, I have to say, especially in this time of, social media where everyone's life looks perfect, you don't see all this confusion, the inner confusion that could be going on, or this, strive to find purpose. And that's what we do, I think, especially as women at this age, we start to look for purpose. What's our purpose? Maybe for a long time we've been taking care of our family and taking care of our job or other people. And this is one time in life where we decide, okay, wait, maybe it's time that we take care of ourselves, but how do we do this? So this has helped, this process has helped one to sit down one-on-one and be honest with each other. In these conversations, we don't just go from me saying, hey, this is what you taught me. We continue the conversation. It's time right now on Zoom, it's an hour that we just spend talking to each other. And through this process, we recognize, hey, we're going through the same things. We have the same stuff going on. We learn from each other through this and we feel supported. And, this is something that we don't necessarily do when we get together in groups with other women, go out for, lunch together. We usually talk about our kids or what's going on in our lives, but it's a lot of times surface because we feel guilty. We tend to feel guilty if we dive too much into the ugly stuff, So this process for women at our age is it allows a safe place to sit down and talk to one each other and listen to one another and practice that, and to recognize that, hey, this gets a little messy, and that's okay, and this is what we're doing, so I think that's the benefit, and realizing too that we recognize each other and we see each other.
You mentioned social media, and there's a lot of studies about this lack of connection, even though we're more, quote, connected digitally with people, like texting, social media, groups, and that sort of thing. And so I think that's where the isolation gets amplified, is we think that other people are connected, and somehow we're standing on the outside, not being invited in. There's this real, it's so imaginary, but it feels so real, this kind of digital connection thing that's going on. And I think that's one of the lessons from quarantine, is it's really not sufficient to only connect with someone on a digital platform, whether it's a computer or a phone. I mean, Zoom gets close, but that there's something about being in the same room with another human being and building that connection. Like, I use Zoom, obviously, to continue connection. We use Marco Polo, which is a video chat app, because I have friends who aren't in California. And it makes me feel like our friendship is continuing connection, because I'm seeing their face, I'm hearing their voice. But I have a friend who just came into town, and we spent time face to face, and it's like, oh, you just realize how much greater. You get used to the digital version because you don't have a choice. But when you get to that person to person, I mean, Shari, this is my experience, I feel so refreshed, and like my cup has been filled. And it doesn't even have to be, like you said, a really intentional conversation. It can just be finally being with a human being that you care about and being in their space.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I sure miss those times together. I'm over here in Washington. I think Washington is similar to California in the way we're, slowly rolling open. And so the face-to-face is not as common over here either yet. I sure miss those. I hear you.
So I do want to know, how has your life changed because of this experiment?
How has my life changed? It's changed in so many ways, but one thing that really comes to mind right now is it's made me more comfortable with strangers. It's made me more comfortable with women who I may have thought were more important than me, or, carried this carried this persona that they wouldn't have time for me, or that I was not someone at their same status. This has made me recognize that we're all the same, and it's made me much more comfortable with people. The other day, I just reached out to a woman that I've met on 2 occasions, who is kind of in that category of somebody that's a go-getter. People look up to her. As far as our little area over here in Seattle, she has a bit of a celebrity status, and so for me to message her and say, hey, I'd love to talk to you one-on-one, that's something I wouldn't have done a couple of years ago. But through this process, I've recognized that we're kind of all the same, really. And a lot of things that used to keep me from connecting with people were actually not them. It was my own perception of who they were. And so that's how this has changed my life. It's made me recognize the similarities, like I mentioned, the common stories that we all have. And made me recognize that if I feel uncomfortable around somebody, typically it's on me. That's my perception, and I just need to communicate.
Perceptions. There's something that impedes our happiness isn't it?
Mhm. Absolutely. Yeah. The perception is huge. And that's a big piece that in life coaching we work on is perception. And it's interesting, just a little switch sometimes that changes perception, changes the whole ball game.
And I think a lot of our perceptions are so familiar to us that we don't even know that they're operating. It's like that operating system that's just whirring in the background, and we're going through life and we're making decisions about ourselves and about other people and about situations that may or may not be true. Not that we're trying to be untrue, but there is something to be said for that awareness that we too have some imbalanced ideas about ourselves and the world. And it's really incredible that you're sharing how the vulnerability on your part has actually opened your eyes to other people.
Yes, absolutely. I used to, there's one woman that I met with who was my 50 dates, and she's in the book. And I mentioned that it took me a long time to talk to her, really, because I put her in a different category than me. And I don't know what that category was, but for some reason I felt that we were different. And I was intimidated by her. So after I, actually got to talk to her, my lesson from her is that I should, rather than approach people thinking, okay, we're different, I can actually approach people thinking that, okay, hey, this could be my next best friend. So yeah, that was my lesson from her. And it's a lot of times it's our own perception, our own messages, as you said, that we don't even realize that we have going on in our head, something ingrained in us that misguides us sometimes.
It's interesting too, and I want to know what your perspective on this is, that is it possible to have a conversation with someone like this and the relationship doesn't necessarily go forward and become one of your best friends? It could, but is there still something to be gleaned from someone that you met and telling them how they've impacted your life, and just that being the core possibly of your whole relationship? Maybe that was the whole kind of student teacher experience, and have any of those relationships kind of not necessarily progressed to the next level?
Yes, yes, absolutely. I think just in general, it's natural for relationships to ebb and flow and people to come in and out of your life. And I don't, as a general rule, I don't think it's a bad thing when friendships end, because relationships naturally end. Our lives change, we shift, different things, interests become important to us. And so even in a course of a year, when I started this out to meet with 50 women, I knew that some of these women I may not have very much contact with by the end of the year, not because of a falling out or anything like that, but because life moves on. And so there are some women in the 50 that I first met with that I've had very little contact with since that meeting when we sat down. There is one woman who I went to coaching school with, life coaching school with, that's a lot younger than me. And my purpose to meet with her is to let her know that I saw in her that even though her chronological age was still in her 20s, and she was having difficulty because a lot of people she wanted to work with were in their 40s and 50s. And as you know, a 20-year-old, a lot of times there's this confidence piece based on age. And I wanted to meet with her to say that I saw her wisdom come from the fact that when she reflects, when actions happen, she reflects, and then she acts on her reflections. She just doesn't act or reflect. She acts, reflects, and acts and reflects. And with that, I saw so much wisdom in her. And I just needed her to hear that even at age 20, she could do so much, or in her 20s, she could do so much with the women she coaches, or even the men she coaches who are older than her, because she had this gift of reflection. And so she and I were in different, we don't live in the same area of the city. We're in different age groups, different stages of life. We have not connected since then, other than briefly once. And that's okay. But that was the message I wanted to give to her. And from her, she taught me, I saw in her myself at that age. And when I started practicing law, and I was able to see where I felt insecure and kind of get a lesson from that and think back to, okay, what made me feel this way? And how can I help other women who are younger than me to see something beyond age.
I love that, because there is beauty in that diversity.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's good to get out of our realm sometimes and get perspective from people older than us and younger than us. And I think having diverse friendships is a very healthy thing as well. I know that's true for me. My friend that I do the Marco Polos with, one of them is older than me. One of them is 20 something years younger than me, actually 2 older than me. One is quite a bit younger, but there's this life experience that they bring to the table that I think is so beneficial for me. And I hear you saying that this is really a way of showing up in the world for you.
Yes, absolutely. And I feel very good about it. I feel I answered a question the other day of what would my younger self think of if she saw me now. And I mentioned in this answer that, I used to drive to work when I was in my late 20s, early 30s. This is when I was practicing law. And I used to put Gloria Gaynor's I Will Survive song on, and sing off key in my car on my way to work. And that's where I was in life. And I had a great job and everything, but I was surviving. And so I think, my answer to that question was the younger me would have been really excited that me now wakes up, and I'm excited because this has become a way of life, and I feel like I'm thriving. And I always think of the quote, or it's a question, if this were the last day of your life, would you be doing what you're doing now? And I think about that often, especially when I get a little irritated about something. But I can honestly say, with this practice and the connections I make and how it's prompted me to do this with other people on a just naturally now, I am doing what I would be doing if this were the last day of my life.
If this was the last day of your life, would you be doing what you're doing now?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
I feel like midlife is a time of that kind of constant reevaluation and reflection. It's such an interesting season of life, and I'm grateful for the reminder of community, but then that extra step of how to enrich your community. And so I have a question for you as we wrap it up. If you were to sit face to face with my tribe one-on-one, what are 3 things that you would really want them to have? What gifts do you have for them? What takeaways would you like to give them?
I think number 1 is that everyone you meet is your teacher and your student. Number 2, find the common story. Everyone you meet, there's a common story there. Find the common story. And number 3, I would say it's the question that we just presented. If this were the last day of your life, would you be doing what you are doing now?
Wow. That is such a powerful thought. And I want to thank you so much for bringing your authentic journey and the vulnerability of that journey to my audience. Thank you for following through on that, because it led to a book and it led to a message. And I believe it is going to have a powerful butterfly effect. So I just want to honor you for moving into something, and then when it opened up greater, continuing to walk through that door, because it's such a blessing. Shari, thank you so much.
Thank you, Gina. I really appreciate everything that you're doing and your message. And it was just an honor to, 1, meet you, to start out this October month with you. I really appreciate this. Thank you.
My pleasure. Today, my friends, I've been speaking with Shari Leid. She's a life coach and the author of the 50/50 Friendship Flow. If you want to find Shari, she's at animperfectlyperfectlife.com, or you can head to www.feminineroadmap.com/episode 196. I will have links to Shari and Shari's book there so that you can get a copy of that and begin creating your own butterfly effect. While you're there, please leave your name and email address. I do send out periodic encouraging emails. Friends, connection is so, so important. And I think we've all learned in this season of life with quarantine how much we need other people. And I hope that you've been encouraged by this conversation today. And if you have been inspired in any way, shape, or form, Shari and I challenge you to take a step in that direction. Hold some space for that. If you think 10 people came to your mind, we encourage you to reach out to those 10 people. If it's only 2 people, reach out to those 2 people. Begin to say the things to the people in your life that you want them to hear. Don't wait until they're gone. Thank you so much, friends, for being with us today. We're so appreciative of the time that you give to us. Please remember to share this with a friend, subscribe, and continue to grow your community and your connection. Thank you so much for being with us today. Take care, my friends. Bye-bye.